Hello everyone, and thanks for watching this presentation online. For those who don't know me, I'm Javier Torrent, and I'm with the e-learning group directed by Baltasar Fernando Monjón at the Complutense University of Madrid. I'm a researcher on serious games, and I'd like to talk to you a little about the work we are currently doing. It's well known for all of us that serious games are becoming important nowadays. According to recent market analysis by the Serious Games Association, the revenue of the serious games industry in 2012 was estimated in between $2 and $10 billion, depending on how much of the market of games, simulations, and virtual worlds is included in the calculation. But it is not only the financial numbers. What is more important is that the efficacy of serious games to learning is now beyond doubt, since it has been widely backed up with research. That makes games appropriate for the introduction in the classroom. However, there are multiple issues related to serious games that still require attention. Now tell me, how much would you pay for a serious game like this one? Well, I don't know about you, but I wouldn't pay anything for it, because you can't actually see a thing. Now imagine it's not that the game is blurred, which actually works perfectly for all the people around you, but that it is only you who see it blurred. Well, that's exactly how students with disabilities felt when we deployed our serious games in their classrooms. Because, just for having a disability, they couldn't play like the rest of their classmates. I remember of one case in which a student just sat silently on his chair for an hour, while the other kids enjoyed the games simply because he couldn't access it. Some of you may probably think that this is not a relevant problem. After all, it only affects a minority. But in fact, it affects much more people than we might think of. According to the latest statistics available from the World Health Organization, as much as 15% of the population have some sort of disability, defined as an umbrella term for impairments, activity limitations, and participation restrictions. This is a pretty big number, and in the near future, this figure will make no other thing than rise, especially in aging populations like the Western countries. So, the message is clear. Accessibility matters to all of us, sooner or later. So, when we saw these issues, is when we said, hey guys, it's time to start working to improve the accessibility of serious games. And in our case, it was easy to decide where to begin. eAdventure. eAdventure is our own game offering platform. I'm pretty sure most of you have heard already about it, but for those who haven't, let me show you very quickly. Through this video you could certainly have a taste of what eAdventure looks like. It is a you see is what you get after a tool, what you can define in scenarios, objects and characters, and connect them to create a fully featured 2D point-and-click adventure game. So, we started by analyzing who has more problems to play eAdventure games, in collaboration with TechnoSite, which is a company expert in accessibility of the ONCE Group, Spanish national organization for the blind. And we found out that eAdventure games were especially cumbersome in terms of accessibility for people with three specific types of disabilities: blind users, users with reduced mobility in hands, and users with low vision, having each of these different problems. So we set out to focus on trying to improve the eAdventure experience for these three user profiles. Blind users have two main problems. The first concerns the input. They cannot control eAdventure games because they are based on point-and-click interface, and they can't use a mouse, which is a device that requires the use of the sight. The second concerns the output, which is mainly visual in eAdventure games. Users with limited mobility have the same problem with the input, since obviously they cannot use a mouse. Users with low vision have a completely different problem, which is that they cannot distinguish interactive elements because these blur into the background, so they can find to click on them. It is good to remark that all these problems are not exclusive of the eAdventure platform. Actually, they are present in many games and game development software. Once we had a clear idea of the problems we wanted to tackle, we started working on the solutions. First thing we did was to design a new way to interact with the game for blind people and people with reduced mobility. With this new interaction, users provide input using short commands in natural language, like grab the notebook or talk to someone. The main difference is that the blind use a keyboard to introduce the commands, and people with limited mobility use their own speech. But to introduce a command, you first need to know you can even see. Interactions are not obvious to the player, because we wanted to introduce a discovery component just to make play more intense. Player interactively introduces special commands that result in the game providing clues and hints on what there is in the scene. The blind player gets this feedback through audio using text-to-speech software, and the player with limited mobility gets it through visuals. But since these concepts are a bit complex, the best way to understand them is to see an example. Do you think? Let's suppose we have this scene and that we are a blind player. We have four different interactive objects, which are overlay marked, each one with an arrow. When we reach this scene for the first time, we get a brief description of what the scene looks like. It might be something like you're at your desk and all the objects on it are at the reach of your hand. And that's it. Something simple. It doesn't give you too much detail. But it will give you the clue to introduce a command like object, for example, which will give you some feedback about what are these objects and also a brief description on how many objects are in the scene and their names. For example, there is a telephone, a plant, a computer, and a bag. So you now have more information to continue on with your interaction. For example, now the player that knows the names of the objects can try different interactions, like for example, use the telephone, or water the plant, and so on. Some of these will work and others won't, depending on how the game was actually defined. We also designed a high contrast mode for people with low vision. In this case, the Adventure Game Engine automatically applies filters to the scene to make it easier to distinguish the interactive elements over the background. Here we see how the engine applies a darker magenta color to the background and a lighter and greener color to the interactive elements in the foreground, so it is easier for you to distinguish them. To test these features, we started by making one of our serious games accessible. And the most relevant conclusion we drew was that making a game accessible is really effortlessly. It takes a lot of time for developers to introduce accessibility because they have to produce new functionality, for example, text-to-speech, new content, like captions, for example. They also need to do more testing and many other things. All these extra activities result in a budget overhead for the project, which makes it more expensive to produce. Perhaps that explains why most of the serious and lesser games that are published today are still not very accessible. So, we decided to make an effort to integrate all these features directly into the Adventure Game Offering platform, so other developers could use them for their own games, reducing in this sense the effort required to make a game accessible. In this sense, what we did was passing from focusing on making one game accessible to make many games accessible at one time, adding scalability to the approach. So to wrap it up, in this presentation we have tried to point out the need to start considering accessibility in serious games to prevent that the games become a potential source of digital divide in the school. Our proposal is to target directly the tools that developers actually use to produce the games, as we have shown through the eAdventure platform. With this approach, we obtain two main benefits. First, we have scalability, which allows to apply the solutions developed to many different games. And second, we reduce the effort to introduce accessibility in new games. Now, let me talk to you a little about what we are currently doing. We are working on a brand new version of the eAdventure game engine, which will be called eAdventure 2.0, and where we plan to introduce these accessibility features, probably improved. The new engine allows running the games in the desktop using HTML5 and also on mobile devices, which will allow us to use the accessibility tools included in these environments. Like for example, the speech API provided with the Google Chrome browser, or the text-to-speech and accessibility API included in Android devices. With these technological advances, we will finally be able to put these accessibility features into production, since we have not been able to do so yet because of the instability of the underlying software components we were using. Take into account that in eAdventure we can only use free software. And finally, let me share with you something we are very proud of. Thanks to working on accessibility, we were awarded with the first prize of the ACM Student Research Competition celebrated in the Assets 2012 conference. Well, that did not make us rich after all, but we got a pretty shiny medal that was very quickly confiscated by my little nephew, which is not so bad after all. And that's all. Thanks a lot for watching. you have any questions, I'll be happy to answer them via mail at jtorrente@e-ucm.es.